younger generations develop a keener interest in their country's history, whether it's that.
Of some of the narratives that we don't often hear or we don't often see. Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in Mayamba. That's a
Mayamba.
town in the southern region.
Okay. So I was just recently in Go, so I passed Mayamba before I go to Go.
When you pass the junction, there's a Mayamba junction where that,
The right.
yes, trading goes on.
Okay.
And Mayamba town is 21 miles from that junction.
If I knew, I would have bypassed and seen your home. But that is all good. That is all good. So 30 plus years you've been teaching history, and like I really want to know what Sierra Leonean history has been like, from the formation of Sierra Leone.
Well,
Pre-colonial,
yes.
colonial, post-colonial.
Sierra Leone has a very long history. It's, from archaeological evidence and other, resources, we know that people lived in this part of the world today called Sierra Leone at least 2,500 years before Christ. So it's a very long history. Unfortunately, however, our history books were written by Europeans, and all they were concerned about was when Europeans started coming here, as if our history began just with the coming of the Europeans. I had a very interesting session with some of my year one students this morning when I simply asked them, who discovered Sierra Leone? And they all said, Pedro da Sintra. Oh, Pedro da Sintra. I said, no. Nobody actually discovered this place. We've always been here. And
if he discovered Sierra Leone, then who discovered him?
yes, and by the time he came, there were already people living on the coast. So he discovered nothing except to give a wrong name to our country, Sierra Leone. When you hear that name, to the rest of the names in West Africa, you think we are from, somewhere, in the States, where you have the Sierra Nevada, Sierra Bays.
So when somebody says Sierra Leone, for those who don't know the meaning of the name Sierra Leone, what is the meaning?
Well, Pedro da Sintra gave that name in reference to the Peninsula Hills, Peninsula Mountains, coming through the coast, landing here. First things you see are the mountains, and it is believed that when you saw those range of mountains, you thought those were lions crouching, and so he gave the name Sierra Leone, meaning lion range.
Oh, lion range.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's how the name stuck.
But what was the original name of the coast by some of the people before that?
Yeah, around this place, it used to have a local name called Rumeron. Rumeron, the wailing of people. You have boat wrecks,
Yes.
and people drowning, be shouting for help, and it was called Rumeron.
Wow, I had no idea. And these are some of the things I really want us to delve into, the narratives and these people are the narratives of the people. So, coming back to you growing up here, what was growing up like for you in the context? I really wanted to understand the psychology of loving history. Something influenced something for you to love history.
Well, yes, I'm just taking particular interest in history to know a little bit more about my people, because unfortunately, not many Sierra Leoneans seem to be interested in history, even the so-called educated ones. And if you really don't know your history, you cannot tell your history. Who else can do it for you? So as a very young secondary school growing people, I became interested.
Beautiful, thank you. I think I was also, it answers my question on storytelling, because history is also part of storytelling. And you have these books, you've written A New History of Sierra Leone, 2016 edition, and we have Sierra Leone since independence, history of a post-colonial state. There's one thing I observed here, and even having conversations with Ishmael and reading his book, the impact of the war on the country. In your view, how that has this framed the narrative of the country?
Well, the war had a huge impact on Sierra Leone, because mass displacement of people, taking in university, a lot of people left and never came back. When I completed my PhD in 93 and said I was coming back, people said, "Are you crazy? Why are you returning to that war-ravaged country?" I said, "But I have to come, because that was part of the condition, of my going to America in the first place." But the war really has had a very huge impact on this country, economically, politically, socially, and otherwise.
So, from 93, you came back, the war was still ongoing.
Yeah, just 2 years old. The war was just 2 years old. It continued right through 2000.
And what were you doing?
I was here, teaching. Except for the brief 1 year period when the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, AFRC, took over and everything was just shut down. And then we took up guns to defend this place.
You did as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, tell me about that. Yes.
Well, what happened after the soldiers had taken over, they aligned themselves with the rebels, and they were harassing people in Freetown all over the place. I had a colleague of mine who were all still up at Contrite, and early morning they just ransacked his house, ate his food, beat him up in front of his wife and children. And every night they would harass us with this person and say, "No, enough is enough." So lecturers from the principal right down, the bottoms, from the military guys, cartridges. And every night, almost religiously, from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, we guarded this place. We had a group down at the lower faculty, colleagues that stayed here. We stayed on the Contrite, flat. And we defended this place, because if we didn't, nobody else could have. It was quite a trying period. I had twin boys. So I bought 2 guns for them, and I had a pistol.
How old were they?
They were about 15, 16. Okay.
Wow.
So they were child soldiers. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't expect this. You just blew my mind. The more I hear these narratives, the more it becomes, when you are outside, you don't really see, but you don't really have a sense of the dire impact until you are on the ground and you are having conversations with people one-on-one, and then you see the dire impact. But one thing that I say that I must commend you guys on is the inner strength that you show to humanity. And even after all this, the love that you are able to show and protecting the institution, putting your life on the line. I'm not sure whether I would have done that, because I would probably have left. Okay.
Well, a lot of people did leave. For instance, I was forced to send my family later to the Gambia. quieting down when I stayed.
Wow. It's not easy.
No.
It's not easy. So from that point, thank God, the war went over. Life sort of became something like normal, and then the institution is functioning. I think my next question will look at, the educational system. How are we teaching it? Are we following our sense of what is the word? Is it still steeped in the colonial system, or what I'm looking at is for a decolonized educational system? And what are your thoughts and opinions about that, and how?
That has been slow in coming, particularly in Sierra Leone. But it's gradually changing. The curriculum, both at the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels, is being transformed to take into consideration our own realities. Yeah, at Fourah Bay College, for instance, when I was a student here, Sierra Leone history was taught only to honor students, those of us in the honors class, and not to the general. But that has changed over the years. We now teach Sierra Leone history right from year 1 through year 4, so that at the time students that graduate, they have a fair knowledge of their country's history and
yes. I think that is very relevant. It's like my interest in history and story also stems from Pamela Dumo. He was a journalist who
tragically died.
Exactly. And the African proverb that says that if the lion does not learn to tell its own story, the story will forever glorify the hunter.
Exactly.
So that's why we are here. As an elder, share with us the narratives, the stories of how this country came to be, and then how do you call it, the Black loyalists. So let's go to the loyalists.
Yes.
So for those watching, those who are Canadian, live in Nova Scotia, if you're Jamaican, Maroon, this session is all for you. So please take a listen. From Jamaica to Nova Scotia in Canada to Sierra Leone.
Yes. Well, the story of the Nova Scotians is rooted in the American War of Independence. The name itself, Black Loyalists, would indicate that they were loyal to Britain and not to America. And then when the American War of Independence began, they found it difficult to fight on the side of the Americans, their oppressors. And so Britain promised, to assist them after the war if they fought on the side of Britain in return for land. And of course, as we all know, the Americans won the War of Independence. And so these black loyalists, or the loyal blacks as they were called, were put in a very precarious situation. They couldn't stay in America because they were considered traitors. And so arrangements were made to take them to Nova Scotia, where that was a British possession, as it were. They were taken to Nova Scotia, where they were promised land in return for their cooperation. Some land was made available to them, but it was not enough. And after waiting for 3-4 or so years, they led a delegation, one of their former commanders called Thomas Peters, led a delegation to England so that it could be relocated in Africa. And because at this time the colony of Sierra Leone had already been founded by the so-called Black Poor of England. These Black Poor, as they were called, these were former enslaved Africans who had escaped from their masters and were
Repatriated
in England. But the conditions for them in England were quite terrible because they had this the poor law societies attached to the Christian churches whose business was to assist poor people. But they couldn't assist the black poor because they did not belong to those parishes. They said their parish of origin was Africa and not England. So they were roaming about the streets. Some philanthropists, like Grand Bishop and others, came to their aid. They formed a company to help repatriate them to Africa. And so in 1787, this group came and established the colony where we are. That colony was not successful due to the Napoleonic Wars. The colony was, attacked. About this same time, Thomas Peters led a delegation to England, to ask that they come to this colony, because they already known that there was a colony in Sierra Leone who would accept these blacks. So they met with the Sierra Leone company officials. These were British merchant philanthropists who had formed a company to help black people in England. So they met with the officials of the Sierra Leone company, and arrangements were made for these Nova Scotians to be brought to Sierra Leone. So John Clarkson, whose brother was on the committee of the Nova Scotians, went back to Canada with Thomas Peters to make arrangements for these Nova Scotians to come. But before they could come here, they had been given several promises that once they arrived in Sierra Leone, they would be given land, enough land to farm and to settle. And that really encouraged a lot of them to come, because a farmland in Nova Scotia was not equivalent to the whole land in Africa, the so-called promised land.
Yes.
So, like the Israelites, they thought they were coming to the promised land, which was Sierra Leone. Because if you two settlements in Nova Scotia, one of which was Batchtown also, out of the 151 that were taken from there, some were already settled. But they left those places because that farmland was not equivalent to the whole land in Africa. And they had also been promised that once they arrived here, they would be free, totally free. They would not be under the control of any white person. And so that really encouraged a lot of them to venture to come out. And thanks to their religious leaders, all these were arranged through their churches, their pastors, who were very influential. So they arranged for them to come, and they came in 1792. About 1,200 of them came together with Clarkson. But once they arrived here, the situation changed. The land that had been promised them was not readily given. But over and above that is this idea of freedom. The freedom they thought they would get in Sierra Leone was not there. And in fact, as a symbol of that freedom, when they came, they established Freetown to show that they were really a free and independent people.
So it's the Nova Scotians that established Freetown.
Exactly, in 1792.
Okay.
They established Freetown, and they were unfortunately under the control of the Sierra Leone company.
That's why it said Freetown is not free.
No. And Clarkson was made governor. And so he had a running battle with Thomas Peters, who actually was the guy who spearheaded the movements to England and arranged for them to come here. But when they arrived here, Thomas Peters was not made governor. Instead, it was this white guy, Governor Clarkson. And that created a lot of problems between the Sierra Leone company and the Nova Scotians. Eventually, they were given land. But then it was tied to the quit rate. This was money you paid for your land. And the quit rate, it was called quit rate then, was what was paid by the Nova Scotians, or what they were expected to pay, was about 100 times more than what was paid in places like Australia and whatever. And so,
what kind of slavery is this? and as you're speaking, my mind is ruminating that the company, did they buy the land or they stole the land and they selling the land?
Well, this land itself was got under very dubious circumstances, because when the Black Power came in 1787, 59 pounds worth of trade goods, not money, trade goods, rum, these cheap things, guns, and they were giving this land to 20-mile radius for the settlement, and this was what the Nova Scotians inherited. But then the quit rents were tied to the land. In other words, the land was not theirs because they had to pay rent. And if it was theirs, there was no business, no reason paying rent. And the Nova Scotians couldn't accept this. They just couldn't. They said, no, this was not what had been agreed before we left.
They've been bamboozled.
Yes, and so this is a complete breach, and we cannot return. So we have to stay here and fight. And this continued until 1800, when there was a Nova Scotian rebellion. They rebelled against the company administration, and they had almost overwhelmed the company forces, but for the timely arrival of the Maroons. These were also former enslaved Africans from Jamaica. They were tracked by police dogs, and they were also sent to Nova Scotia, and later to Sierra Leoone. They arrived almost at the time when the Nova Scotian freedom fighters had overwhelmed the communist forces. And as one would expect, they fought on the side of the communist forces and the rebellion was put down.
They should have joined the other.
Yes, but then...
it was a different story now. Today we will join. We'll all come together.
And so the Nova Scotians really played a great role in reviving this colony. But for them, this colony would have floundered. They had to revive it. And here we are today, Freetown.
Which is not free.
No, it's not free.
Freetown has the blood, the sweat of and lives of many Nova Scotians that were brought here. And I think when you are talking about the Maroons siding with the
Sierra Leone Public Forces.
Yes, the Sierra Leone Public Forces. It's just the same thing as the divide and conquer.
Exactly.
Oh, you guys are better than these people, so you have to join us to conquer them. And I think that's a strategy that was also used in Suriname. The Ghanaians that were taken there to help fight the indigenous people of Suriname to capture. So there's been a particular format of, divide and conquer amongst us. Wow, that is deep. So therefore, I came here, I only know Pidgin English somewhat, and then I hear Krio. What is the link to Krio?
It's a form of Pidgin English, only that we have added a lot of local words as it were to it, enriched it into Krio. But it's a form of Pidgin English. It actually started as Pidgin English, but it's been enriched with many local words.
I think, okay, let me rephrase it. I've come to understand that Krio, aside from the language, is also seen as an ethnic group.
Yes.
What is the narrative with that?
Well, it's a mixture of mixtures, if I can put it that way. Because the Krio culture, or the Krio people involved as a result of the mixture of the Black Poor from England, the Nova Scotians, the Maroons, and more significantly the liberated Africans or the captives. These were enslaved Africans whose ships were captured on the high seas, brought here and set free after Britain had passed the Abolition Act of 1807.
Oh my goodness. So even if you were from Ghana, you were from Nigeria, you're from Gambia, but you don't know your way home.
No, you have to be brought to Freetown to be set free. And this is where we have a lot of people of Nigerian origin in Freetown. A lot of the Krio people have Nigerian middle names, you know. But we're talking about thousands of enslaved Africans. Yes. In fact, if you go to Waterloo, you pass through Waterloo, you have these settlements, Igbo town, this down, they are settled along those ethnic lines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea. Now you sent me to go chase another story. So let's talk about, we've done the oral part of the history. Let's talk about your writings, your writings. What inspired you to get into writing these books? Let's start with, if we can.
Started with that one.
This
is the one I started with. You know, and this
a new history of Sierra Leone.
Yeah, this is new value. It was published in 1990.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when I started teaching, I realized that we didn't have a standard text that would really address the needs of students. There were books, of course, written by, you know, some Europeans, but did not really address our history properly. So I then decided to start something modest, and it developed into this, you know, which narrates the history of the country from very early times, from you know, pre-colonial times to the present. You know, so it's more of a general history book, which can be read even by, you know, the general reader. You know, gets a very fair idea of the country's history. You know, that's how that one came about. This other one is a course I used to teach in the department. That very name, Sierra Leoone since independence.
Okay.
And I thought I would put together some things for the kids, because we have all these materials but scattered all over the place.
Yes.
And somebody had to put them together. And that's how I came along the second book.
That is wonderful. Sierra Leonean Writers Series, History and Political Science. Wow.
Yeah, we have a publishing house called Sierra Leonean Writers Series.
Yes.
And we have a publisher.
Was it following like the African Writers Series?
Well, yeah, something like that. Which was it? Any Man?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I missed that.
Oh, really?
Yes, I missed the African writers that used to come from there. It was really enlightening.
It was.
Yes.
It's a pity it was stopped.
Yes. But other small independent publishing houses have taken
over the years.
Yes, and then we have Chimamanda DG, those ones also emerging from that. Wow. I would say my interest in the narrative earlier came from Professor Edu Buahin.
Oh, Edu Buahin, yes. I met him in Ghana several years before he passed away.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, he influenced us as secondary school students with that first publication, Topics in West African History.
So I read on the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai Empire from him.
Yeah.
Yes. And that up to now is the foundation of me knowing about Ghana, about Africa, about our old empires and how it's shaped us as a people. And that is why it was difficult for me to take African studies, because if you've read Professor Dubuahin and then you're looking at the colonial, for lack of a better word, colonial master telling you your story, telling you your history, it was very difficult for me to comprehend. Thank you. It was very difficult for me to comprehend. And I'll share this narrative with you. I was once in an anthropology class, and social cultural anthropology, and the professor was talking about Africa and some of the history, and it was not the history I knew as an African. So my big mouth, my hands went up, my big mouth spoke. Let's just say that I got a D. Yes, I flunked the class. my final paper, I gave it to the TA to take a look at it and see if I've gotten everything together. And he said that the paper was good. And I had some students who were from Ghana who were doing their masters and their PhDs also take a look at the paper. So I knew my paper was an A paper. But you know what this white woman did to me? Who is marking? Who's giving me the marks? Yes. So that was my very first encounter with institutional racism and discrimination. If I just kept quiet and not challenged, I would probably gotten my A and gone about my way. I was told to challenge it, but I said no. And the reason why I said no was that I knew that she does not hold my future in her hands. And here I am, telling an African story here with you. So, with this history being told and being written, what I want from you right now is a message to, because one of the things I also hone in on is that even though it's history, it is a story. It is our story, part of a collective narrative. And it's meant to inspire and it's meant to give hope. What do you have for the new generation that is coming in pursuit of this part of history, writing and storytelling?
Well, my appeal is that the younger generation should develop a keener interest in their country's history, whether it's Ghanaian history, Nigerian history. They need to develop a very keen interest in it because they have to tell the story after we shall have gone. You know, so the onus is on them to be interested and to dig deep, as it were, because half of the story has not yet been told. We are just scratching the surface. There's still a lot to be told. It's their responsibility as a player to ensure that they develop a keener interest in their history, because it's also the foundation of patriotism. If you really don't know your history and culture, you find it difficult to be patriotic. You know? And this is not to suggest that they have to romanticize our history. You know, tell it as it is. You know, and that's one thing I would really encourage a lot of young Africans to do with respect to their histories.
Beautiful. So guys, you've been listening. If you're on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, whichever podcast you're listening to, you've been listening to myself, Nana Yayabwa, and Professor Joe Alie on Sierra Leonean history with a focus on Nova Scotian Maroon history here in Sierra Leone. And this is part of the narratives of bridging between the diaspora and home, the motherland. And this particular episode here, Sierra Leone, Freetown with Professor. Thank you so much for accepting us. Thank you for doing this interview with us.
Thank you very much, Nana. It's a pleasure, talking to you.
You are most welcome.